Welcome back to our daily soap update channel. As someone who's been faithfully watching this television masterpiece for over 40 years, I find myself absolutely captivated by the recent developments surrounding the cold fusion prototype. I have seen weather machines and endless plots for world domination over the decades, but the sheer realism of this current weapons storyline feels distinctly modern and deeply unsettling. The burning question that keeps me awake at night is what exactly happened to that dangerous cold fusion prototype that Ross desperately attempted to use for his grand escape. When we look back at the original storylines from decades past, the villains always had a clear, theatrical escape route prepared in advance. However, seeing Ross trying to smuggle this apocalyptic device on a massive transport truck felt incredibly intense, gritty, and desperate. It was a stark departure from the polished villains of yesteryear, showing a raw panic that kept me glued to my screen. The device was supposedly almost online and fully operational when Ross made his ill-fated move to transport it out of the city limits. Will the intelligence agency actually seize and use this terrifying technology? I firmly believe they will, because the agency we see today is a far cry from the noble organization of my youth. They are highly opportunistic and power-hungry. Let us deeply analyze the involvement of Jack, a character whose layers of deception continue to fascinate me as a longtime viewer. When Jack first casually mentioned the classified project that the agency was actively investigating, he made it abundantly clear that the organization desperately wanted to acquire that specific weapon. This was not just any random piece of military hardware. This was the ultimate, final masterpiece designed by Caesar, a man whose genius was only matched by his cruelty. Having watched Caesar terrorize our beloved town for decades, I can confidently say that anything bearing his intellectual signature is bound to bring catastrophic destruction. However, the fascinating twist here is that when Jack expressed the agency's desire for the weapon, he was completely oblivious to the fact that Ross was a deeply corrupt individual and a treacherous double agent. In the old days, the agency directors were practically omniscient, but seeing Jack operate with such a glaring blind spot adds a wonderful layer of human error to the narrative. It makes me wonder how a seasoned operative could miss such obvious corruption right under his nose. The answer, I suspect, lies in Jack's own murky past and his blinding ambition to secure Caesar's project to elevate his own status within the intelligence community. This entire situation with Jack immediately brings to mind the dark and complex history of the private security group he used to command with an iron fist. It is impossible to forget that Jack was once the formidable head of that shadowy mercenary organization, functioning simultaneously as the top director for the agency in the country. The conflict of interest is absolutely staggering, and it perfectly illustrates the modern moral ambiguity of the show that I have grown to appreciate and analyze. We all vividly remember the shocking storyline where Jack was rightfully sent to the penitentiary for facilitating those illicit weapons deals that put countless lives at risk. His time behind bars was supposed to be a period of reckoning, but his subsequent release has only stirred the pot further. Does that old mercenary group still secretly exist in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to acquire this cold fusion gun? I am absolutely convinced that they are still highly operational. Organizations with that level of funding and structural depth never simply dissolve. They rebrand and wait for the heat to die down. The tangled web becomes even more complicated when we look at how Jack ruthlessly betrayed his former associate, Valentine. Watching Jack turn on Valentine was a bitter pill to swallow, as there was once a twisted honor among them. Jack's sudden, highly suspicious elevation to the position of station chief at the newly established office in our city is a massive red flag. How does a convicted arms dealer suddenly become the top local authority? It speaks volumes about the deep-seated corruption within the system. This betrayal completely altered the power dynamics in the city, leaving Valentine to navigate a treacherous landscape without his former allies' protection or resources. I am constantly asking myself how Valentine will eventually exact his revenge, because a man of his immense intellect never lets a betrayal of that magnitude go unpunished. This brings us back to the most critical mystery currently plaguing my mind. Where in the world did that devastating weapon vanish to? After the chaotic and bloody confrontation, the authorities quickly moved in, and the lifeless body of Ross, along with several others, was unceremoniously carted away to the morgue. Amidst the flashing lights and the rush of emergency personnel, the physical location of the cold fusion prototype remains a glaring, terrifying question mark. Did the agency secretly confiscate it during the cleanup, or did someone else slip away with it? I strongly suspect that a third party managed to steal it, because high-value items in this fictional universe never simply end up in a standard evidence locker gathering dust. The plot thickens exponentially when we consider the shocking revelation regarding Cassius. The official, heavily redacted narrative fed to the public and lower-level operatives was that Cassius tragically perished alongside Ross in the chaos. However, the thrilling truth that we as the audience are privy to is that Cassius actually survived the ordeal and was quietly whisked away by the enigmatic Z. The dynamic between Cassius and Z introduces a fascinating new psychological thriller element to the show. Z presented Cassius with a chilling, absolute ultimatum: face the ultimate penalty of death for his crimes, or agree to work exclusively for Z's hidden, nefarious agenda. Naturally, the basic human survival instinct takes over. But what exactly does Z want from a complex and damaged man like Cassius? Does Z genuinely believe that Cassius possesses the highly specialized, intimate knowledge required to safely dismantle or perhaps even operate the cold fusion weapon? I believe the answer is a resounding yes. We must remember that Cassius was raised, manipulated, and molded by none other than Caesar himself. Growing up under the tyrannical tutelage of Caesar means that Cassius inevitably absorbed a wealth of classified information regarding his mentor's projects. Caesar would have never trusted outside, unvetted engineers with his final, crowning masterpiece. Therefore, Z's decision to spare Cassius is a calculated, brilliant, tactical move. Z recognizes that Cassius is the living key to unlocking or neutralizing the cold fusion prototype, making him an incredibly valuable asset. This raises another thrilling question that has been bothering me. Is that old mercenary security group, the one notorious for recycling and repurposing stolen agency weapons, actually pulling Z's strings from behind the curtain? I would not be entirely surprised if Z is merely a high-level middleman for the very organization Jack used to run. Let us shift our focus to Valentine's original, highly dangerous mission that set all of this into motion. Valentine was originally tasked with the monumental responsibility of completely dismantling the cold fusion prototype before it could ever be activated. As a viewer, I was rooting for Valentine to succeed, knowing his unique skills. However, the tragic and infuriating kidnapping of Liesel threw a massive wrench into his meticulously laid plans. Liesel was brutally abducted and mercilessly blackmailed into using her brilliant scientific mind to complete the device. By the time Valentine finally managed to track down the hidden location of the device, he realized with utter despair that he was simply too late to stop the inevitable. The weapon had been fully completed, the cold fusion reaction was deemed viable, and his mission to dismantle it safely had become a physical impossibility. What I find absolutely baffling, and what makes for incredibly compelling television, is Valentine's recent behavior upon his return to civilization. When Valentine finally made his highly anticipated appearance at the local hospital, the sheer joy radiating from Carly and young Charlotte was palpable. Charlotte's innocent happiness at seeing him safe was a deeply touching moment. Carly, always fiercely protective of her inner circle, was equally relieved to see him standing there intact. Yet, amidst all the emotional reunions, Valentine committed a glaring omission regarding the weapon. Ensuring that the apocalyptic weapon was completely rendered inoperable was supposed to be his absolute highest priority, the very reason he risked his life in the first place. Surely he would immediately mention the terrifying status of the device to his trusted allies, if only to warn them of the impending catastrophic danger. But he remained completely silent on the matter. He did not utter a single word about the operational cold fusion prototype to Carly or Charlotte. Why would Valentine deliberately withhold such critical, life-threatening information from the people he loves most? Did the trauma of the recent events cause him to temporarily forget the threat? Absolutely not. A seasoned operative like Valentine never simply forgets a weapon of mass destruction. I firmly believe he is playing an incredibly deep, dangerous game of psychological chess to protect his vulnerable family. By keeping the terrifying knowledge of the weapon's completion entirely to himself, he is attempting to shield Carly and Charlotte from the grim reality of their situation. Speaking of Carly, her recent observations regarding the current state of the intelligence agency were nothing short of brilliant and incredibly perceptive. With her trademark bluntness, Carly accurately pointed out that the modern agency is just as fake, corrupt, and morally bankrupt as the notorious criminal family Valentine hails from used to be in their darkest days. As a viewer who fondly remembers the classic battles between good and evil, Carly's assessment strikes a deep chord. The lines between the designated heroes and the established villains have blurred so completely that it is impossible to trust anyone carrying official credentials or flashing a badge. If the corrupt agency genuinely desires to possess this cold fusion weapon, we must ask ourselves a terrifying, overarching question. Who exactly do they intend to use it against in their quest for dominance? The lingering legacy of Cesar continues to be the dark, suffocating cloud hanging over our beloved characters and their intertwined lives. His final project is not just a machine. It is an active manifestation of his enduring malice, pushing every single conflict further to the absolute brink of disaster. The new, unprecedented shockwaves that Z is currently sending through the criminal underworld are directly tied to this poisonous legacy. By securing Cassius and potentially the weapon, Z is plunging the entire city into a brand new era of absolute madness. As a lifelong fan, I am completely on the edge of my seat, eagerly anticipating the explosive resolution to this magnificent storyline.